Imagine doing an overnight flight from Zurich in Switzerland over towards New York. Everything feels normal, but there is something that you and maybe even the crew is completely unaware of. Somewhere beneath your feet, inside of a sealed container, there is $500 million worth of gold bars. A silent fortune just sailing through the sky. Now this scenario is not only plausible, it is probably happening right now. So why is so much gold being flown across the Atlantic? How does the whole process work, and what happens when, not if, something goes wrong? You know, like it did in the movie Tenet. Well, in this video, I will explain how banks, airlines and logistics firms quietly coordinate one of the most valuable operations in the sky, and how this is all done from the bellies of commercial airliners to high security handovers and vaults, and even with the occasional heist. Stay tuned. Gold is one of the oldest forms of money, with roots going back nearly 3,000 years to ancient Egypt and the very first civilizations. Gold is beautiful, it is relatively easy to mold and form, and it's also a noble metal, meaning that it never corrodes. And all of these factors made it into a natural and highly desirable early form of currency. Today, of course, gold is no longer a form of direct currency, not for most of us anyway, and it hasn't been for centuries. But that doesn't mean that it isn't an integral part of our financial system. It still makes up a part of the investment portfolios of people, companies and also of entire countries, but these days it is mostly seen as an investment asset, something that investors can basically use to store value. Gold is therefore traded and sold as a commodity, much like wheat, oil and pork bellies. That actually is really a thing. And like any commodity, the gold price therefore rises and falls with markets based on several external factors. But unlike those other commodities, arranging for the physical possession of gold requires quite a lot of attention and care for obvious security reasons. And it is here that the oldest form of currency meets one of the newest forms of transportation, the airplane, in a quite interesting and clandestine way. But before we get to that, I need to give you a little bit more detail about this trade. You see, even in the digital age, the physical movement of gold is actually crucial to the global financial system. So knowing that, where is most of the gold then located? Well, the two cities completely dominating here is London in the United Kingdom and New York in the United States. London is the center of physical bullion trade, while New York handles a certain kind of predictive gold contracts called futures. Now, during normal times and circumstances, the price of gold in these two places tend to be quite similar. But when prices between the two diverge for whatever reason, well, then the opportunity for profit emerges, where traders will buy gold where it's relatively cheap and then fly it to where it is more expensive. Simply put, that situation where something becomes cheap in one place and prices somewhere else leads to a form of trade called arbitrage, which is what happened with gold early now in 2025. Now, I don't want to get too much into politics here, but because of market uncertainty, when it comes to tariffs and other possible restrictions on trade, gold in New York suddenly started trading significantly higher than in London in the beginning of this year. And because of that, JP Morgan, for example, therefore reportedly flew nearly $4 billion worth of gold over to Manhattan in order to take advantage of this arbitrage. So how do they actually do this? Well, these trades can't really work unless gold can be physically moved and quickly. And this means that ships are too slow and trucks and trains obviously can't cross oceans, meaning that the only practical solution here is aircraft. So what's that process like? How exactly does gold go from a vault in London over to another vault in New York? Well, let's start with the banks. Institutions like JP Morgan, HSBC and a handful of others currently completely dominate the gold trade. They buy, sell, lend and store bullion for their clients and are therefore responsible for arranging the transport and all of the details around it. But they don't actually store the gold at either end. So in order to complete a trade or to fulfill a contract to supply a certain amount of gold, it is first withdrawn from its secure storage, where each bar is catalogued by a serial number, weight and purity. Because it is important to also understand here that each gold bar has a specific owner, so the bank can't simply pick random bars up for each transaction. It has to be the right ones. Now, while there are a handful of private reserves, the vast majority of gold between these two countries is stored in only two places: the Bank of England's vaults in London and the US Federal Reserve in New York. Now, if you watched Bruce Willis in Die Hard 3, you may remember the US Federal Reserve vault there, but I'm not sure that it actually looked like that in reality though. Anyway, moving the gold from one vault to the other would be complicated enough, but because this is the finance world, the whole process has to be made even a little bit more complicated. Remember in the start of this video where I asked you to imagine boarding a flight to New York from Zurich, not from London? So why was that? Well, that's because the gold in London have to make a detour to Switzerland before it can finally head west across the Atlantic. Now, the reason for this was originally a bit obscure, and here we come to one of our biggest problems when researching these type of stories. Since we live in such a polarized world, it's getting harder and harder to find reliable sources. Even the stories about the gold price is riddled with political bias. And that is why we use today's sponsor, Ground News, an excellent tool to break through the noise. And to see what I mean, you can follow along at ground.news/mentor or with this QR code. Over 350 sources worldwide have reported on this story, and out of those, over 40% are media conglomerate owned, while more than 10% are independent news. And that could mean that the way that this story is framed could differ quite a lot depending on where you are reading it. For example, WSWS sees the gold surge as a crisis of capitalism, while Real Clear Markets instead blames Fed policy. A classic left versus right divide, in other words. Now, if you use the Vantage plan like I do, you will also unlock extra features like My News Bias, which helps you recognize your own reading habits and discover new outlets for a more balanced view of the news. But don't just take my word for it. The Nobel Peace Center has called Ground News an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers and expand your worldview. And I couldn't have said it better myself. To try it out, just use your phone camera and scan this QR code or go to ground.news/mentor. Right now, Ground News is offering you, my viewers, 40% off their Vantage plan. That's just $5 per month, which is great, but it is a time-limited deal, so make sure that you grab it now. Thank you, Ground News. Now, back to the story. So, why do we need to fly gold the wrong way through Europe, through Switzerland, before taking it over to New York? Well, the gold that the Bank of England stores must be in the form of 400 troy-ounce bullion. That's large gold bricks weighing 12.4 kilograms, or about 27.3 pounds. But the gold that the Federal Reserve stores must be in much smaller, 100 troy-ounce bars, who weighs just 3.1 kilograms, or about 6.8 pounds. And that's the reason for that Switzerland detour. Over there, a small number of refineries melt and then recast gold into the required formats before the bars are finally placed in reinforced containers, tamper-evident and sealed. There are then no flashy markings on these containers, just coded labels, and some of them might weigh hundreds of kilos, and none of them have an indication of just how valuable their contents are. So once the packaging is ready, they are then handed off to security firms like Brinks or Loomis, who are specialists in what's known as specie logistics, and they will then handle the secure transfers from vault over to the airport. Now that move is made obviously under armored transport, sometimes also escorted by police, and timing is everything here. Arrivals are coordinated to minimize exposure and wait time. At the airport, staff will be waiting and will then let the transport drive directly onto the airport tarmac, since it is considered much safer for the gold to be handed off directly airside, bypassing the regular terminals. Once it's there, the gold is then loaded into a designated VAL, valuable cargo zone of the aircraft, under supervision of the airline staff. But if we're setting aside the security aspect here, as a type of cargo, gold is just business as usual, as far as pilots are concerned anyway. Like I said in the beginning, gold is a stable and non-reactive metal, which means that there aren't any special restrictions on it and it doesn't pose any safety concerns. So it can basically be treated like any regular piece of cargo, like bananas, tulips or rubber chickens. And the flight crew, us guys, we will likely not even know exactly what we're carrying. And since gold is a safe material, its transportation isn't limited to only cargo airlines. In fact, since passenger flights tend to be both frequent, fast and ironically often cheaper than dedicated cargo flights, they are a very common go-to choice for this type of transport. And this means that British Airways, Emirates, Lufthansa, American Airlines and others regularly carry gold in the bellies of their passenger aircraft. Now, cargo airlines and charters do also play a role here, especially when shipments are too large, too urgent or too sensitive. And even military aircraft have sometimes been used for this, but that's mostly for central bank transfers. As it turns out, valuable cargo, especially gold, is actually one of the most discreet yet profitable services offered by commercial airlines and freighters out there. A single well-insured shipment can net an airline more profit than an entire cabin full of economy passengers can. And this is why a lot of airlines out there have invested in specialized teams, training and infrastructure in order to be able to handle valuable or VAL cargo. Swiss International even has a precious cargo desk, specifically coordinating the secure white glove movement between Zurich and the financial capitals of the West. So like I said before, when you are taking your next business red-eye flight, you might be sitting on top of a literal fortune, completely unaware. In flight, there is nothing visibly different about these journeys. It's just another transatlantic hop for the airline, the crew, and of course you, the passengers. But behind the scenes, the shipment is being tracked constantly with brokers, insurers, and the gold owners all making sure that everything stays properly on track. Then, after landing in London or New York, armored vehicles are sometimes already waiting to meet the aircraft at the gate, or the aircraft could be later moved to a special warehouse in order to await pickup. After that, the gold is then quietly offloaded and moved again under escort over to its new vault. Now, this operation might only take 12 hours from vault to vault, and in the world of finance, that kind of speed can be priceless, since gold prices can move quickly and change the chances for proper arbitrage. Now, as you might imagine, there are strict rules and a lot of paperwork involved around shipping gold. For now at least, gold is not subject to duties or taxes, but it still needs to be tracked and accounted for at every single step of the way. And some countries even require special licenses for the importer to bring gold over a certain mass. And then of course there is the insurance. Since obviously the buyers and sellers want to make sure that their investment is protected if anything should go wrong, insurance policies often cover theft, loss or damage from vault-to-vault transport. And underwriters like Lloyd's of London and Alliance are brokered by the investors, moving the gold with new policies written for every trip, with similar policies used for other high-value goods as well, like diamonds or art, for example. Now, the insurance cost depends on the route, political risk, airline and handling procedures, where riskier routes obviously cost more. And in some cases, insurers can even completely deny cover, forcing investors to quickly find alternate transport. So what I want to get to is that insurers are really critical here. For example, you might think that the amount of gold in each shipment might be limited by concerns like the weight and balance of the aircraft, right? No. In practice, it is actually the insurers that will limit the amount of gold carried well before the weight becomes an issue. Typically, insurance might cap coverage of $500 million per flight, or around 5 metric tons, which is obviously normally not a problem for most large airliners. For larger shipments than that, the gold would obviously be split across multiple different flights, and these policies are in place to limit any one party's loss if the worst would happen, which it also has. On November 26, 1983, 6 robbers broke into the Brink's Mat warehouse at London's Heathrow Airport with the help of a security guard. After taking the staff of the warehouse hostage, the robbers then stole 3 metric tons of gold, scheduled to be flown to Hong Kong on the following day. Now, they made off with around £26 million worth of gold and other valuables, which, inflation adjusted, would be around $112 million today, and most of that gold was never recovered. Then, in 2019, at Sao Paulo's International Airport, a criminal gang executed a heist which could have been taken straight out of a Hollywood movie. Disguised as federal police officers and driving vehicles painted to look like official law enforcement trucks, the thieves infiltrated the cargo terminal in broad daylight. Once they were inside, they then threatened warehouse staff and forced them to load a shipment of gold, 750 kilograms in total, worth over $30 million at the time. This gold was scheduled for export to Zurich and then to New York later on the same day, and the entire operation took just a couple of minutes to do. After this, the criminals vanished without firing a single shot, and despite multiple arrests and partial recovery of vehicles and evidence, the bulk of the gold still remains missing. More recently, on April the 17th, 2023, another gold robbery happened in Toronto, Canada. An Air Canada flight from Zurich landed, and after its cargo was moved over to the terminal, a truck showed up and presented Air Canada's personnel with what appeared to be real documents, but who were in fact convincing fakes. The gang then accepted delivery of 5 metric tons of gold without batting an eyelash, and then simply drove off. And their crime was only discovered when the real armored truck later showed up for the shipment. Now, quite funny, or sad, depending on which side you're on, end to this story was that because the shipping broker had not declared the true value of the shipment, a court later agreed that Air Canada's liability for the robbery was limited to only 18,000 Canadian dollars, which is around 12,500 US dollars. That's $2.50 per kilo of gold. But of course, not all gold losses are heists. In 2018, a bizarre incident occurred in Yakutsk, Russia, one of the coldest inhabited cities on Earth. A Soviet-era Antonov An-12 cargo plane was taking off carrying over 9 tons of precious metals, including gold, platinum and diamonds from a nearby mine. But shortly after departure, the rear cargo hatch suddenly failed, either due to improper latching or an ice-induced malfunction. And the result? Well, a cascade of gold bars spilling out of the plane mid-takeoff, scattering across the icy runway and onto the surrounding snow-covered fields. Authorities then had to shut down a 26-kilometer radius area around the airport while recovery teams searched for the lost cargo. Now, of course, precious cargo can also be lost in more tragic ways. On September 2nd, 1999, a Swiss Air Flight 111 crashed while en route from New York over to Zurich after a fire had broken out in the area above the cockpit. In that tragedy, apart from the 229 passengers who perished, the MD-11 also carried 2 famous paintings, 0.9 kilos of diamonds from the Smithsonian, 1.8 kilos in Swiss watches, 4.5 kilos of jewelry and 50 kilos of currency. So in that case, Lloyd's of London paid out today's equivalent of $567 million for the losses. Going back to the gold routes though, while London to New York might be the most high-profile corridor, it is far from the only one. Switzerland to Dubai is also a major route, driven by both high-end jewelry demand and investment trade. The United Arab Emirates' central location and its tax-free status on gold imports have made Dubai into a global hub for physical bullion. So every year, hundreds of tons of gold move through this corridor, where Emirates and Swiss International Airlines are the primary carriers. Dubai's gold souk, in fact, remains one of the largest retail gold markets in the world, where freshly flown-in bars are often recast into coins, jewelry and smaller investment pieces. Another major route connects South Africa to both London and Zurich, since South Africa is home to some of the world's largest gold mines and is therefore a major exporter of raw and refined bullion. These shipments are generally managed through dedicated supply chains, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, widespread flight suspensions and disruptions led to temporary gold stockpiles building up and logistical bottlenecks. With commercial flights grounded, gold was therefore sometimes rerouted through cargo charters or even halted altogether, causing further financial disruptions. And this just further highlighted just how fragile the logistics of precious metals can be, as well as how much they depend on global air travel. Dubai to India is another vital corridor, one that includes both legitimate and illicit flows. India has a massive appetite for gold, but high import taxes have fueled a thriving black market economy. Smugglers often try to sneak gold past customs, hiding it in luggage, electronics, or even inside of their bodies. And to combat this, airports like Mumbai and Chennai now employ advanced scanning technologies and specially trained gold-sniffing dogs to try to find it. But even with that, even with the strictest possible measures, billions of dollars worth of undeclared gold is believed to make its way into India every single year. Then there is the Asia-Pacific corridor, where countries like Australia and China ship large quantities of gold over to Zurich, London and Hong Kong. A lot of this gold comes from mining operations, but some shipments are also coming from private investors seeking safer storage or better market access. In most of these operations, gold is again usually shipped via belly cargo on long-haul airliners, but sometimes ultra-high net worth individuals and private wealth managers arrange gold transfers aboard private jets, bypassing commercial lanes altogether. These bespoke services then, of course, offers added discretion, speed and also security for its elite clientele. Finally, there are also increasingly controversial gold shipments originating from some parts of the world. The Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali and Sudan export considerable volumes of gold, often to the UAE, sometimes through opaque and unregulated supply chains. Now, human rights organizations have raised concerns about some of this trade, as smuggling and illegal mining frequently bypasses environmental and labor protections. But to be clear, many legitimate firms do also operate in Africa. But political unrest and the lack of consistent oversight means that some gold in international vaults may have had a more questionable journey. All told, these routes form a sprawling and mostly invisible global web, an airborne network of trust contracts and precious cargo, which is only expected to grow as financial unrest now makes gold even more valuable. With global central banks increasing their gold reserves and private investors diversifying out of some other types of currency, the amount of gold shipped annually by air just continues to rise. According to the World Gold Council, central bank purchases of gold hit record levels already back in 2023, with much of that gold requiring international transport. And looking ahead, we may see even more sophisticated tech applied to this world. Satellite tracking, biometric vault access, smart containers with temperature and movement sensors is now being added, all used to provide assurance to airlines, other carriers and insurers who need to keep updating their risk assessment as technology overall evolves. But even with all of that innovation, the fundamentals of gold shipping remains stubbornly old school. You melt it, mold it, weigh it, lock it up, fly it, get it and lock it up again. Despite the rise of things like virtual wealth and paper assets, when things get serious, some investors will still want gold as a safe haven. And if you think about it, it is quite funny that we all live in a globalized economy where financial data moves in milliseconds, but the actual gold that's behind some of that system still rides in the belly of an airplane. Now, this was a little bit different, so please let me know if you enjoy these deep dives where aviation kind of meets finance, logistics and a little bit of everything. If you did, then please consider supporting the work that we do here by joining my Patreon using this QR code or by going to patreon.com/join/mentorpilot. And also check out the link to our sponsor in the description and the pinned comment below. My name is Peter Hörnfeldt and you're watching Mentor now. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.